Chapter 1. A puppy named Ziggy. The sunlight slanted gently across Maple Street, turning the leaves gold and the pavement warm as spring air breezed through the quiet neighborhood. In a cream-colored house with red shutters and a wind chime that danced every time the wind shifted, something beautiful was about to begin. Max paced across the living room for the fourth time in 5 minutes. He checked his watch again, then peeked through the curtain. Anna sat cross-legged on the couch, folding a soft blanket, watching him with quiet amusement. "They'll be here," she said. "Not for the first time." Max didn't answer. He just moved to the window again, watching the driveway with a look that could only be described as hopeful panic. His foot tapped on the hardwood floor. "What if he's scared of us?" he asked. "He won't be," Anna replied. "He's a puppy, Max. He's going to love us the second he sees us." As if summoned by fate, the sound of a car pulling up the driveway floated through the open window. Max froze. Anna stood beside him, heart skipping. A car door closed gently. Then came the knock. When they opened the door, the world tilted slightly. In the arms of a smiling woman from the shelter, wrapped in a light green towel and wriggling with excitement, was a golden-furred Labrador puppy. His eyes sparkled like warm chocolate, and his tail wagged with enough force to shake the towel loose. When Anna reached for him, he licked her hand without hesitation. "This is Ziggy," the woman said. The moment felt like sunlight poured straight into their hearts. Max reached out slowly, and the puppy leaned into his touch with unearned trust, as if he'd been waiting to come home all along. After signing the paperwork and exchanging thanks, the door closed behind them. Just like that, their home had grown by 4 paws. Ziggy didn't tiptoe into his new life. He tumbled into it headfirst. He explored the house with wild enthusiasm, bumping into furniture, sniffing under beds, barking at his reflection in the hallway mirror. He chased specks of dust and pounced on slippers. Max and Anna could only laugh as they followed him from room to room like proud new parents. That night, they tried to settle him into his soft new bed beside theirs. The moment the lights went out, Ziggy whimpered. Not loudly, just enough to tug at something deep inside Max's chest. Max leaned over, let his hand fall beside the bed, and Ziggy nosed into his palm with a grateful sigh. Anna whispered, "He just wants to know we're near." Ziggy curled up against Max's hand and slept soundly until morning, as though he'd always been part of their lives. Chapter 2. Ziggy's Growing Years. Time passed like it always does when you're not watching. One moment Ziggy was a clumsy little blur of paws and floppy ears, and the next he was bounding across the backyard with a tennis ball clutched triumphantly in his jaws. His legs grew long, his chest broad, and his once high-pitched barks deepened into warm, friendly woofs that made the walls echo with joy. He had a way of making the ordinary feel like an event. Mornings became a game of chase the sock as Ziggy stole laundry and dashed under the dining table. Evenings were about curling on the couch between Max and Anna, snout buried under one of their arms, paws twitching in dream chases. He had a talent for making them laugh, unfailingly, effortlessly. On weekends, Max would toss the ball in the backyard while Ziggy flew across the grass like a bullet of sunshine, all muscle and speed and barely contained excitement. Sometimes he would overshoot and tumble in a clumsy roll, only to pop up wagging, proud of himself. Other times, he would refuse to give the ball back, initiating a tug-of-war that ended with him flopping onto Max's chest and covering his face in slobbery kisses. Anna began baking dog treats in the kitchen, mixing oats and peanut butter into little bone-shaped cookies. Ziggy would sit beside the counter for as long as it took, barely blinking, waiting with the patience of a saint. The second she set one down, he'd take it with such gentleness it felt ceremonial. He loved puddles. Even the smallest one was an invitation to chaos. More than once, he tracked Mud all the way to their white bedsheets before they could catch him. Max tried to scold him once, tried really, but Ziggy's guilty tail wags and remorseful brown eyes melted any trace of frustration. Sometimes they'd find him lying under the dining table with one of Max's socks between his paws like a treasured trophy. He didn't chew it, he just liked having it nearby. A piece of his humans. One snowy night, the three of them sat on the couch watching the flakes fall in silence. Ziggy rested his head on Anna's lap, sighing in that deeply content way dogs do when they feel safe. Max looked at them both and shook his head with wonder. "I didn't know you could love a dog this much," he said softly. Anna smiled without looking away. "He's not just a dog." They both knew it was true. He wasn't just a pet, or a companion. Ziggy had become their rhythm. The quiet reason to get out of bed on hard days. The laughter waiting behind the door. The soul of their little house. And Ziggy, even in sleep, thumped his tail once in reply. Chapter 3. A New Family Member. It happened on a warm spring morning, the kind where everything feels a little softer, a little newer. Anna stood in the doorway of the bathroom, one hand resting gently on her belly, the other holding a small white stick. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at Max, her eyes wide and shimmering with something too big for words. He froze, toothbrush still in his mouth. Then he dropped it into the sink and crossed the room in 2 long strides, wrapping his arms around her before she even spoke. She laughed into his shoulder and he whispered, "Are you sure?" "As sure as I've ever been," she said. From the hallway, Ziggy let out a bark, not one of alarm, but of curiosity, as though he already sensed something had shifted in the air. The months that followed moved slowly and tenderly, like a song played on soft piano keys. Their house filled with tiny clothes, hand-me-down books, and the gentle creak of a newly assembled rocking chair. Max painted the spare room a soft forest green, and Anna spent her evenings running her fingers over the folds of baby blankets, smiling to herself as Ziggy lay at her feet, watching her with thoughtful eyes. At first, Ziggy didn't quite understand the flurry of new items. He sniffed at the crib's wooden bars. He watched Anna sort onesies and tiny hats, sometimes nosing one onto the floor to investigate further. But he never chewed anything, never misbehaved. It was as if he understood instinctively that these strange, small objects were important, sacred even. As Anna's belly grew, Ziggy adjusted without complaint. He began walking more slowly beside her, no longer pulling ahead on the leash. He curled beside her legs when she napped on the couch, his chin resting on the curve of her knee. Some nights, Max would wake up to find Ziggy already lying by the bedroom door, facing it like a sentry. Then came the day when the air changed again. Everything was still and golden. The baby's room was finished, with plush animals lined neatly along the window seat. Ziggy lay in the hallway, head on his paws. He lifted his head suddenly when Max came rushing from the bedroom, shoes half on, voice trembling. "She's having contractions," he said breathlessly, half to Ziggy, half to himself. The hospital bag was already packed. Max helped Anna into the car, and Ziggy watched them go from the front porch, ears perked, tail motionless. It was the first night Ziggy had ever spent alone in the house. When they returned, the next afternoon, everything was different. In Max's arms, wrapped in a pale blue blanket, was a bundle that made no noise. Anna walked slowly beside him, exhausted and radiant, her smile weak but real. Ziggy didn't bark. He didn't charge the door like he usually did. He simply sat, still as stone, and stared at the thing in Max's arms. "Hey boy," Max said softly, crouching down with care. "Come meet Peter." Ziggy took one cautious step forward, then another. He sniffed the edge of the blanket and let out a deep, slow breath, as if something inside him had just settled. Then he lowered his head and gently licked the baby's tiny sock-covered foot. Anna covered her mouth. From that moment, Ziggy was no longer just their dog. He was Peter's silent guardian, his shadow, his steady protector in a world that had suddenly become much bigger than before. In the days that followed, Ziggy took up a post beside the crib. Every time Peter stirred, Ziggy's ears perked. If Peter cried, Ziggy whined softly and nudged Max or Anna with his nose. When the baby slept, Ziggy would lie beside the crib, tail thudding slowly, almost as if humming a lullaby only he could hear. And when Peter laughed for the very first time, it wasn't because of a rattle or a silly face. It was because Ziggy had nudged his stuffed elephant off the edge of the changing table and caught it mid-air with a triumphant snort. The sound of Peter's giggle filled the room like sunlight through an open window, and Ziggy barked in delight, tail sweeping the floor in wide, happy arcs. From then on, they were inseparable. Chapter 4. Ziggy and Peter's Adventures. Peter's first steps were unsteady, like a baby bird learning how to use its wings. He would stand gripping the edge of the coffee table, legs wobbling beneath him, eyes wide with determination. Ziggy always hovered nearby, not too close, not too far, just enough to catch him if he tipped. One morning, Peter let go. One tiny foot, then another. His arms flailed, and his balance shifted. But before he could fall, Ziggy stepped in. With a gentle nudge of his shoulder, he steadied the toddler and let Peter lean against his side until Max swooped in to catch them both. From then on, Peter didn't walk alone. Wherever he went, Ziggy followed. Across the living room, through the kitchen, into the backyard. They moved like a two-piece parade. Peter's small feet padded across the floor, and Ziggy's claws clicked faithfully behind. It didn't matter where the destination was. Ziggy was always there, his gaze calm, protective, unblinking. They invented their own kind of language. Peter spoke in babbles, nonsense syllables strung together with feeling. Ziggy answered in soft huffs, snorts, and low tail thumps. Sometimes Max would watch them from the doorway, Peter sitting cross-legged with a picture book, reading aloud to Ziggy, who would lie with his head on the child's knee, eyes half closed in bliss. "Do you think he understands?" Max once asked. Anna looked over from the sink, smiling. "He doesn't need to. He listens." Every day became an adventure. In the backyard, the pair built forts from cushions and picnic blankets, giggling as the wind tried to tear their kingdom down. Peter dubbed Ziggy Sir Fluffy Ears and declared him the bravest knight in the land. Ziggy, ever the loyal companion, would sit at attention while Peter waved a stick like a royal scepter. They played hide and seek, though Ziggy was famously terrible at it. He always hid in the same spot, behind the curtain in the living room, tail poking out and wagging like a flag. Peter would shriek with laughter every time he found him, and Ziggy would burst out for a joyful tackle, both of them collapsing into a heap of giggles and fur. On rainy afternoons, Anna would make hot cocoa while Peter curled up next to Ziggy with a stack of storybooks. Sometimes he fell asleep mid-sentence, his cheek pressed against Ziggy's shoulder, and Ziggy would remain still as stone, not daring to move, even if his legs went numb or his tail itched. In those quiet moments, when the storm tapped gently against the windows and the world faded into a blur of soft sounds and warm light, there was only one truth that mattered. They belonged to each other. Max often played along in their games, pretending to be a growling monster chasing them through the hallway. Peter would squeal and hide behind Ziggy, who, sensing the game, would leap between them, barking playfully but always placing himself in front of the boy. No matter how silly the game became, Ziggy's instinct never faded. At night, when the house fell into stillness and the moon hung low over Maple Street, Peter would whisper secrets into Ziggy's ear. Stories about dragons and dinosaurs and how someday they would go to space together. Ziggy would lick his face, then curl around him like a warm golden wall. Anna stood in the doorway once and watched the scene, hand over her heart. She didn't say a word. Because really, what could you say in the face of a love that pure? Chapter 5. A Camping Adventure. Peter had just turned 4 when the idea came to Max like a spark. They'd been sitting on the back porch, the late afternoon sun painting long shadows on the grass, when Peter pointed at a cloud shaped like a sailboat and asked, "Can we go where clouds sleep?" Max grinned and ruffled his hair. "Not quite. But how about we camp under them?" Anna looked up from her gardening book, smiling at the idea. "Pinewood Forest isn't far. We could make a weekend of it." From his spot under the chair, Ziggy thumped his tail once, clearly voting yes. Planning began that evening. Peter helped choose marshmallows and blankets. Max packed the tent. Anna made lists and checked them twice. Ziggy trotted between them all, watching with curiosity as the living room slowly filled with gear and excitement. When Peter laid his head against Ziggy's back and whispered, "You're coming too, right?" the dog licked his cheek in reply. They set off early on a Saturday morning, the car loaded with pillows, coolers, and snacks that mysteriously kept disappearing every time Peter sat near Ziggy. The forest greeted them with its towering trees and birdsong. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth, and light danced through the leaves like golden confetti. They found a small clearing beside a slow-moving stream, quiet and soft beneath their feet. While Max pitched the tent, Anna unrolled the sleeping bags, and Peter and Ziggy ran through the trees like explorers discovering a lost world. Peter gathered sticks for the campfire, proudly returning each time with arms full of treasure. Ziggy followed close behind, occasionally dropping his own contribution. A pinecone or someone's forgotten glove, tail wagging in triumph. As dusk settled in, they sat around the newly built fire pit, its stones still warm from the sun. Max lit the fire, and soon the smell of grilled burgers filled the air. Anna poured lemonade into enamel mugs. Peter sat cross-legged with Ziggy at his side, feeding him tiny pieces of hot dog when he thought no one was looking. The world seemed to slow down around them. The forest whispered its ancient lullaby through the trees. The sky shifted from blue to pink to violet, and stars began to poke through the twilight one by one. Fireflies danced near the edge of the clearing. Peter chased them with soft giggles, and Ziggy bounded behind him, not to catch them, just to be part of the joy. Later, Max brought out marshmallows, and they roasted them over the glowing coals. Peter dropped his into the fire twice, then declared it extra crispy, and ate it anyway. Anna leaned her head on Max's shoulder. Ziggy lay stretched out on the blanket, his head resting on Peter's lap as the boy ran his fingers through his fur. There was a peace in the air that only comes in moments too perfect to last. A kind of hush that settled gently over them, like a blanket made of stars. Peter yawned. Ziggy stirred. The fire crackled softly, and just beyond the reach of the light, the woods watched, silent still. Chapter 6. The barbecue party begins. The scent of grilled meat curled through the trees as Max flipped sizzling burgers over the fire pit. The coals hissed with every drip of juice, sending up tiny flares of orange. He stood barefoot on the soft earth, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a pair of tongs in one hand and a bottle of barbecue sauce in the other. Anna laid out plates and mugs on a checkered blanket nearby, humming a soft tune that floated like birdsong across the clearing. She poured lemonade into Peter's cup and topped it off with 2 blueberries, just the way he liked it. Ziggy lay beside her, his tail sweeping the leaves slowly, watching every move with polite interest. Peter was darting in and out of a patch of low bushes near the edge of the campsite, giggling as he threw a rubber ball and called for Ziggy to fetch. Each time, the golden dog bounded after it with joyful speed, ears flapping, mouth open in a wide dog smile. Peter clapped every time Ziggy returned with the ball, even though the routine never changed. The sun was beginning its slow descent, brushing the sky with strokes of orange and gold. Shadows stretched longer across the forest floor, but the clearing remained filled with the warmth of firelight and laughter. 5 minutes until food, Max called. Peter tossed the ball once more, this time a little farther, and Ziggy took off after it, skidding through the leaves. Anna watched them with a soft smile as she set a folded napkin under each plate. She didn't notice the shape in the trees. Not yet. Just beyond the glow of the firelight, past the patch of ferns where Ziggy's ball had landed, a figure stood still between the trees. It wasn't part of the forest. It didn't belong. But it knew how to hide. It had been watching since the afternoon, eyes fixed on the boy, on the happy chaos of the family that had let its guard down. Ziggy froze mid-step. He hadn't reached the ball. His body went still, fur on edge. He lifted his nose and sniffed the air, twice, 3 times. Something wasn't right. His tail, once high and wagging, now hung low and alert. Then he turned sharply toward the tree line. Anna called out, "Ziggy?" But Ziggy didn't respond. His eyes were fixed, muscles tight. A low growl vibrated in his chest, barely audible, but unmistakable in tone. He moved slowly, stepping in front of Peter, placing himself squarely between the boy and the dark beyond the bushes. Peter looked up, confused. "Ziggy." The dog didn't look at him. He stared into the trees. Max placed the last burger on a plate and turned toward the fire to call his family over. He saw Ziggy standing stiff and silent, his brow furrowed. Anna was already walking toward them. "What's wrong, buddy?" she asked, crouching beside Peter. Ziggy remained still. The figure in the trees didn't move either. "Not yet. Just waited." Max called, "Dinner's ready, guys. Let's." Then Ziggy barked, loud, sharp, and fierce. It wasn't playful. It wasn't for show. The sound cut through the evening like a blade. Anna's heart dropped. Max dropped the tongs. And somewhere in the trees, something began to move. Chapter 7. A Shadow in the Woods. The forest, once humming with gentle evening sounds, had gone strangely still. Even the birds had fallen silent. Anna straightened slowly, one hand on Peter's shoulder, the other resting just behind Ziggy's ears. The dog's body was a wall, solid, unmoving, taut with focus. His hackles stood up in a ridge along his spine, and his eyes, so often filled with warmth, were now sharp with something deeper, older, something primal. Peter reached up and grabbed a fistful of Ziggy's fur. "What's wrong?" he asked in a small voice. Ziggy didn't answer with a bark. He just growled low again, throat tight, chest still. His tail didn't wag. He didn't blink. Max took 2 quick steps toward them, his hand instinctively reaching for Peter. "Ziggy, hey buddy, what do you see?" No one saw the figure until it moved. Between 2 trees, maybe 30 feet away, the stranger stepped forward just enough to be visible. He was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a hood pulled low over his face and hands shoved into the pockets of a dark jacket. He didn't wave, didn't speak. He just stood there, still as a tree, staring into the clearing as if deciding something. Max froze. Anna instinctively pulled Peter to her chest. And Ziggy stepped forward. Not far. Just enough to place his whole body between the boy and the shadow. His growl deepened, vibrating like a warning bell inside a cave. It echoed through the clearing, low and guttural. It wasn't just fear in the sound, it was certainty. Ziggy knew. He didn't need language, didn't need logic. He just knew. The man took a step closer. Max raised his voice. "Hey, can we help you?" No answer. The stranger shifted his weight slightly, as if preparing to move again. Ziggy barked, this time with force, and crouched into a stance Max had never seen before. Legs braced, head low, ready to spring. The man flinched. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and slipped back into the woods without a word. Leaves rustled where he passed. Branches trembled. Then stillness returned. But not peace. Max ran to Anna and Peter, his arms encircling them. "Did he say anything?" he asked, breathless. Anna shook her head, clutching Peter tightly. The boy was silent, staring at the trees. Ziggy stayed exactly where he was, still watching the forest, nose twitching, ears flicking toward the faintest sound. Minutes passed. Long ones. Only when Max placed a hand on Ziggy's shoulder did the dog finally move. He turned his head and looked up at his humans, not scared but certain. He stepped back toward Peter and sat close, pressing his side against the boy as if anchoring him to the earth. Anna's voice was barely a whisper. "We should pack up." Max nodded. "Yeah. Let's go home." They doused the fire. The plates were left behind. The tent collapsed in a rushed bundle of nylon and tangled poles. Ziggy never left Peter's side, and Peter never let go of Ziggy's collar. The stars blinked high above them as they loaded into the car. Peter sat in the back seat, curled against Ziggy, who kept his head lifted the entire ride, eyes fixed on the trees through the rear window. No one spoke much on the drive back. But they all felt the same thing. Something had followed them out of the woods. Chapter 8. Ziggy's Brave Stand. It was supposed to be over. Back in the safety of their home, the forest behind them, the danger should have faded like a bad dream. Max triple-locked the doors that night. Anna closed every curtain tight. They let Peter sleep in their bed between them, with Ziggy curled at his feet. No one mentioned the man in the woods. Not out loud. But the silence between them was heavy. The next morning, the sun rose just like it always did. Peter was already awake when Max opened his eyes, lying on his stomach with one hand resting on Ziggy's back. Ziggy lifted his head slowly, blinked, then licked the boy's ear, drawing a giggle that broke the tension like a sudden breeze. Breakfast smelled of pancakes and bananas. Anna hummed softly while Peter poured too much syrup. Max sipped his coffee slower than usual. They were trying to make the day feel normal again. But Ziggy was not at ease. He stayed close to Peter, closer than usual. He followed the boy down the hallway, waited outside the bathroom door, paced along the windows. His ears twitched at every sound. Something inside him hadn't settled. Peter didn't notice. He was too busy building a castle out of couch cushions and declaring himself king of Pancake Mountain. Ziggy laid beside the throne, watching the doorway. It happened in seconds. Anna had gone out to take the trash. Max was rinsing dishes in the sink. The front door was closed but not locked. The house was full of sunlight and soft music. And then the knob turned. Ziggy's head shot up. The door creaked open. At first, Max thought Anna had come back in. But then he heard the hinge catch, the sound too heavy, too quick. He turned. A man stood in the doorway. The same man. From the woods. This time, there was no hesitation. He stepped inside with quick, sure movements, one hand inside his jacket. Max shouted, "Hey!" But before the words fully left his mouth, the man was moving toward the living room, toward Peter. And Ziggy launched. He didn't bark this time. He didn't growl. There was no warning. Only motion, golden and blinding. Ziggy hurled himself between Peter and the man, crashing into the stranger with the full weight of his body. The man stumbled, but didn't fall. He reached into his jacket, pulled something dark and sharp. Max screamed. Anna ran from the side yard, hearing the chaos. Peter didn't move. He sat frozen on the floor, eyes wide, clutching a stuffed toy. Ziggy snapped and lunged, biting down on the man's wrist. The knife clattered to the ground, but not before it sliced through fur, then skin. Ziggy yelped but didn't retreat. He stood his ground, body braced, blood blooming along his shoulder like a spreading shadow. Max grabbed a chair, swung it, missed. The man backed away now, breathing hard, shaken. Sirens howled faint in the distance. He turned and fled through the still open door, disappearing down the street like smoke. Max chased after him for half a block before collapsing to his knees. Back in the house, Anna knelt beside Ziggy. Peter was crying now, crawling over to his friend. "Ziggy," he whispered, voice cracking. "Ziggy, don't be hurt." The dog was lying on his side, his breathing quick and shallow. Blood soaked the fur around his shoulder, but his eyes remained fixed on Peter. He lifted his head once, licked the boy's hand, then rested it back down. Max returned breathless. "The police are coming. I couldn't catch him." He fell to the floor beside them, and for a long moment, they were all there, huddled around Ziggy, trying to believe that love could hold him together long enough. The ambulance arrived first, then the police, then the quiet, the stunned, stretched out silence that always follows something too big to hold in your hands. And Ziggy lay still. But even in that stillness, he had already done what only the bravest hearts ever truly manage. He had chosen to protect, not because he was told, not because he was trained, but because he loved. Chapter 9. A Heartbreaking Sacrifice. The living room, once filled with laughter and footsteps and the soft thump of Ziggy's tail, had fallen into silence. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind. The kind that sinks into the walls and clings to the corners, like the last note of a lullaby that ends too soon. Max knelt on the rug, one hand pressed gently against Ziggy's side, his fingers trembling with every shallow rise and fall of the dog's chest. Blood matted Ziggy's golden fur, seeping through the towel Anna had pressed to the wound. He was warm, but weakening. Peter clung to his mother's leg, silent now, his cheeks stained with dried tears, his fingers gripping her jeans like lifelines. Anna stroked Ziggy's ears, whispering the way she used to when he was just a pup. "It's okay, baby. You're such a good boy. You're the best boy." Ziggy's eyes fluttered. He looked up at Max, then Anna, and finally at Peter. The boy he had chosen, the one he had loved more than anything in the world. And then, as if gathering the last of his strength, he wagged his tail once. Just once. Slow. Soft. Final. His body stilled. His breathing stopped. Anna gasped. Max bent forward, pressing his forehead against Ziggy's neck, the smell of pine and blood and dog shampoo still clinging faintly to his fur. Peter knelt beside them now, no longer crying, just quiet, staring at his best friend, waiting for the rise of a chest that would never lift again. The world moved on. Outside, a breeze swept leaves along the street. A bird chirped. Somewhere far off, a car honked. But inside that small house on Maple Street, time held its breath. A part of them had been torn away. Ziggy was gone, and there was no way to say goodbye that could ever feel like enough. Chapter 10. A Family's Grief. The house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too clean. Too still. Max hadn't moved Ziggy's collar from where it lay on the entry table. The leash still hung on the hook by the door, and his food bowl sat untouched in the corner of the kitchen. No one had the heart to put anything away. Every item felt like a thread still tied to him. And letting go of one meant letting go of all. Peter refused to sleep in his own bed. Every night since it happened, he crawled into the middle of Max and Anna's. He didn't ask. He didn't cry. He just came, small and silent, and curled between them without a word. Anna tried to keep the house moving. She did laundry. She made toast. She watered the plants. But everything she touched seemed quieter than before. The blender was too loud without Ziggy barking at it. The floor felt colder without paws tapping across it. Even the light through the windows seemed dimmer somehow. As if morning too. Max barely spoke the first few days. He sat for hours on the back porch, staring into the yard. He still looked for movement, a flick of a golden tail by the tree, a familiar shadow trotting past the fence. But there was nothing. Peter carried Ziggy's blanket everywhere. It was soft and faded and covered in fur. He dragged it through the living room, over the porch steps, up into the bed. He wrapped himself in it, and whispered things no one else could hear. One night, as Anna tucked him in, she found him wide-eyed beneath the blanket. "Will he come back if I wait long enough?" he asked. Her heart broke again, in that quiet, splintering way that feels like it might never stop. She sat beside him, brushing his hair from his forehead. "No," she said gently. "Ziggy can't come back. But he's not gone either." Peter didn't understand. Not fully. But he nodded. He always did when he didn't want to cry anymore. Sometimes, Max would find himself reaching for a sound that wasn't there. The jingle of tags, the soft sigh of a dog lying down at his feet. He would pause mid-motion, hand outstretched, then lower it slowly, remembering. They didn't talk much about that day. Not yet. The pain was still too close, like a cut you can't touch without flinching. But in the silence, something lived. In the shared glances, the unspoken rituals, the way they lingered a second longer at the door or stared a little too long at an empty patch of floor. Ziggy was still there. He had taken a piece of them with him when he left. But he had also left behind a piece of himself in everything they were. Chapter 11. Returning home. They left the camping gear in the garage for weeks. No one spoke about it. The folded tent, the dirt-smudged lantern, the cooler still half-filled with unopened juice boxes. They all sat there like frozen echoes, untouched and undisturbed. It took time to return to anything close to normal. The first night Peter finally fell asleep in his own bed was the quietest in weeks. Max stood in the hallway for a long while, hand resting on the doorframe, listening to his son's soft breathing. There were no whimpers. No Ziggy curled at the foot of the bed. Just the stillness of a boy too young to understand the shape of grief, but old enough to carry it. In the mornings, Max still poured food into Ziggy's bowl out of habit. The sound of kibble hitting ceramic made his stomach tighten every time. Anna would silently empty it later, gently, as if Ziggy might still be listening. Peter missed him in ways he couldn't always explain. Sometimes he would start telling a story about something funny Ziggy had done, and then stop halfway, lips trembling. Other times he would crawl under the blanket on the couch and whisper, "It's cold without him." Max and Anna tried to be strong, but there were moments when the pain leaked out anyway. Once, Anna found Max sitting on the kitchen floor with Ziggy's old toy in his hands, the one shaped like a squirrel with one ear missing. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She sat beside him, and they held it together, both remembering the weight of joy that toy used to carry. They didn't rush their healing. They didn't try to fill the silence with noise. Instead, they let the grief settle, like snow falling in a quiet field. Cold, yes, but strangely beautiful too. A stillness that made room for memory. And slowly, something began to change. Not everything, And not all at once. But enough. Peter started drawing pictures again. Not just of Ziggy, but of Ziggy and himself, running through forests, jumping into clouds, flying with wings made of stars. He hung them on the fridge, and each time he added a new one he said, "So Ziggy can see it." Max didn't correct him. Because maybe he could. Anna began tidying up the house again. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she knew Ziggy would have hated the mess. She vacuumed up the fur clinging to the couch, and for once, it didn't feel like erasing him. It felt like love. They kept the collar on the shelf. Not as a shrine, but as a reminder. He had been there. He had lived. He had loved them fiercely. And that kind of love doesn't vanish just because the body does. Chapter 12. Peter's longing. Years passed as they always do. Peter turned 5, then 6, and now 7. He grew taller, his baby fat melting into lean limbs. His voice deepened just slightly, no longer the bubbly babble of a toddler, but the careful curiosity of a boy trying to understand a world that had already taught him what it meant to lose something you love. He had stopped asking when Ziggy would come back. But he never stopped missing him. He still carried the blanket sometimes, especially on days when the sky looked the way it did that weekend in Pinewood Forest, low and gray, with the trees barely rustling. He no longer held it like a baby does a comfort item. Instead, he folded it over his lap while he read, or rested his hands on it absent-mindedly while staring out the window. There was a spot in the backyard that Peter returned to often, just beneath the oak tree where Ziggy used to lie in the shade. Sometimes Peter would bring a ball, roll it out into the grass, and watch it come to a slow stop. Then he'd sit beside it, knees drawn to his chest, not speaking, not playing, just remembering. He didn't talk about Ziggy as much anymore. But the absence lingered in his drawings. Even when he sketched dragons and castles and imaginary machines, there was always a dog somewhere in the background. Golden. Smiling. Sometimes Max would watch Peter from the kitchen window, the way he used to watch Ziggy. And he'd feel that familiar ache. Not just for the dog they'd lost, but for the quiet way grief reshapes a child. Anna noticed it too. One evening, as she tucked Peter into bed, he asked, "Why do I still feel like he's supposed to be here?" She sat beside him, brushing the hair from his eyes. "Because love doesn't stop when someone leaves," she said. "It just changes shape." Peter looked at the ceiling, his face thoughtful. "Sometimes I think he's outside waiting." Anna didn't tell him he was wrong. Because maybe in some way, Ziggy was. At school, Peter was kind. Fiercely kind. He stood up for kids who were picked on. He shared snacks with classmates who forgot theirs. His teachers said he had an unusually gentle spirit for someone his age. Max and Anna knew where that came from. Ziggy had taught him, without ever saying a word. But even kindness can't erase longing. And there were days when Peter's smile faltered, when he sat a little quieter at dinner, or asked to sleep in their bed again. Not because he was scared, but because he felt something missing. They didn't say no. They just pulled back the blanket and let him curl up between them, still small enough to fit there, still young enough to need holding. And though the house no longer echoed with the sound of Ziggy's paws, there was something else that remained. The space he once filled had become something sacred. Not empty, but open. Ready. For memories. For dreams. For love that never left. Chapter 13. A Dream of Ziggy. That night, the stars were especially clear. Peter lay curled beneath his blanket, the faded corner of Ziggy's old blanket clutched to his chest. The house was quiet. A breeze stirred the curtains ever so slightly, and the trees outside rustled like soft whispers in a foreign tongue. Sleep came slowly, but deeply. And then, without warning, Peter found himself standing in a field that didn't quite exist. The sky above was vast and velvet blue, filled with stars that shimmered like tiny lanterns. The ground beneath him was soft and glowing, not grass exactly, but something gentle and bright. A breeze brushed past his face, warm, familiar. And then he saw him. Ziggy. Not the Ziggy from the hospital floor or the memory weighed down with pain. This Ziggy stood tall and proud, golden fur shimmering with a kind of light Peter had never seen before. His eyes sparkled the way they used to when chasing a ball or waiting for a treat, and his tail wagged in wide, joyous arcs. Peter didn't run to him. He didn't need to. Ziggy trotted over and pressed his head gently into the boy's chest. Peter wrapped his arms around the dog's neck and sank into the softness, the warmth, the safety he hadn't felt in so long. "I missed you," Peter whispered. Ziggy didn't speak. Not with words. But Peter heard him anyway. "I never left." They walked together across that glowing field, side by side. Peter asked questions he hadn't dared say aloud. Where Ziggy had gone, whether it hurt, whether he was okay now. Ziggy didn't explain with answers. He explained with a nudge, with the way the stars grew brighter as they moved, with the steady beat of presence that said, "You were always worth it." As they reached the top of a gentle hill, Ziggy stopped. He looked out across a horizon filled with light, not the burning sun kind, but something deeper, almost like music made visible. He turned to Peter, his eyes full of something vast and tender. "Don't be sad," his presence said. "Saving you was my job. My greatest joy." Peter swallowed hard. "But I still miss you." Ziggy pressed his forehead to the boy's, tail thumping once. "I'll always be with you. Watching. Loving." And with that, he gave Peter a playful shove, just like old times, and bounded down the hill, his fur catching the starlight like fire. Peter tried to chase him, laughing through tears, but the light grew too bright, and the ground beneath him began to blur. He woke up. His cheeks were wet. His heart was full. The room was dark, but not cold. Peter sat up slowly, still feeling the echo of warmth on his arms, still hearing the faint sound of paws on a dreamlike path. He didn't cry. Not this time. He smiled, whispered, "Thank you," into the dark, and laid back down, holding the blanket not as a wound, but as a memory. Chapter 14. Finding joy again. Peter couldn't stop talking about the dream. At breakfast the next morning, he told Max and Anna everything. The glowing sky, the soft field, the warmth in Ziggy's fur. The words that had no sound but carried meaning like sunlight carries warmth. "He said he never left," Peter whispered, spooning cereal that had long since gone soggy. "He said he was watching me." Anna sat beside him, hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. "I believe he is," she said. Max reached across the table and tousled Peter's hair. "That sounds like Ziggy, always keeping an eye on his boy." The dream did something. Not all at once, not in the dramatic way books sometimes say things change, but in little moments. Peter began to smile more. He started spending more time in the backyard again, near the tree they once shared. He picked up old habits, sketching, pretending to be an explorer, talking to himself in soft tones as if narrating adventures with a companion just beyond the corner of the fence. One afternoon, he came inside with muddy knees and a bright grin. "Ziggy helped me find treasure," he announced, holding up a chipped marble he'd found buried beneath the tree. Max and Anna didn't ask questions. They simply nodded and admired it, as if Ziggy had truly guided his paws to it. Anna suggested they plant something that would grow, that Ziggy would have loved. Peter picked a tree. Not a tiny flower or a shrub, but a young tree with strong roots and soft leaves. They planted it near Ziggy's favorite spot in the yard, digging together under the spring sun. Peter tied Ziggy's old collar around the base of the trunk. "Now he can grow with it," he said. They sat beneath the sapling that evening, letting the wind move gently through the leaves. It didn't feel like saying goodbye. It felt like saying hello in a different language. Bit by bit, the house changed too. Laughter came back. Not the same as before, but a quieter kind, one that bubbled up slowly and stayed longer when it arrived. Peter told stories again. Max cracked silly jokes again. Anna sang softly in the kitchen while stirring pancake batter. Sometimes Peter would run into the hallway and pretend he was being chased, just like the old hide-and-seek games. There was no barking, no paws chasing after him, but he smiled as he ran as if he could still hear them. In the evenings, they began sitting together under the stars again. Not because they needed to forget, but because they had remembered. Ziggy was never really gone. He was in the stories, in the drawings on the fridge, in the worn blanket Peter kept at the foot of his bed, in the soft breeze that made the young tree sway just enough to catch your attention. Grief hadn't left them, but joy had found its way back in, and they welcomed it, because Ziggy had taught them how to love with their whole hearts, and how to keep loving, even when it hurt. Chapter 15. Ziggy's lasting legacy. Peter grew older, and the tree grew with him. By the time he turned 10, its branches had begun to stretch beyond the fence line, casting long, gentle shadows across the grass. In summer, its leaves whispered lullabies. In autumn, they danced like golden memories falling to the ground. He still sat beneath it sometimes, not every day, not like before. But on quiet afternoons when the wind was kind and the world felt slow, he would lie in the shade and stare up at the sky, letting the branches frame his view like arms reaching for something higher. He didn't cry much anymore. But he never forgot. Ziggy had become part of the way Peter moved through the world. He looked both ways before crossing the street, even when no one reminded him. He offered his hand to kids who sat alone at recess. He stood up to bullies, not with fists, but with a voice that didn't tremble, the voice of someone who knew how it felt to be protected, and how important it was to pass that gift forward. Max noticed it in the way Peter opened doors for strangers. Anna saw it in the way he listened when others spoke, not just waiting to respond, but truly hearing them. Ziggy had shaped those parts of him, quietly, steadily, from the very beginning. One rainy afternoon, Peter brought home a friend from school, a boy named Theo with shy eyes and 2 small shoes. They played in the living room for hours, and when Max offered to drive Theo home, Peter walked with them to the door. Before closing it, he whispered, "Ziggy would have liked you." The next morning, he left a drawing on the fridge, a picture of the tree, tall and strong, with 2 kids beneath it. And next to them, a golden dog with a crooked tail and kind eyes, running full speed into the wind. Ziggy's old collar still hung on the branch outside, faded now, the metal tag dulled by time. But sometimes, in the quietest moments, it would chime softly in the breeze, a sound so faint you might miss it if you weren't listening. Peter always heard it. Years later, when Peter grew taller than Max, when his voice deepened and his drawings became paintings, when he sat down to write about the things that made him who he was, he began with a dog who taught him courage, a dog who never ran from danger, a dog whose love had no boundaries, no conditions, no end. And so Ziggy's brave heart lived on, not just in memory but in action, in kindness passed from one hand to another, in loyalty earned and given. In every moment Peter chose to live the way Ziggy had taught him to, fully, fiercely, and with love that never needed words. Because the truest goodbyes are not the ones whispered in sorrow. They are the ones that echo in how we live after.